With the huge growth in popularity in the US and abroad, there's no better time than now to bet on Formula One. That's why today, the Grueling Truth and Betting.net and myself, editor in chief Jesse Cox for Betting.net, are going to show you how to bet on Formula One. So I'm no expert on Formula One, which is exactly why we brought in our expert, Marcus, here. Thanks for joining us today, Marcus.
Thanks for having me on the show again, Jesse.
No problem. So let's get straight into it. What's your favorite site in the U.S. or your favorite sites in the U.S. to bet on Formula One? And let us know if they have any good bonuses going right now.
So at the moment, what comes to mind, you got two sites which we can use to bet on Formula One. The first one is Caesars. Caesars has got a great platform, great sports book. They got great markets. And they've also got a really good bonus, an $1,100 first bet insurance, $1,100. So it's something that you can make use of if you've never bet on F1 or if you haven't used a betting site in general. And my second would be FanDuel. They also have a fantastic platform with some very good markets available. And you can use their free bet offer, which is a match deposit bonus up to $100.
Awesome. So there's more than just the U.S. out there. Formula One has a huge following overseas, in Europe, and worldwide. Do you have any good suggestions for people that want to bet F1 that aren't in the U.S.?
Sure. You got other great, fantastic websites. Obviously, the bonuses will be regional, so it depends which country you're at. However, you got websites like Betfair, who got amazing markets every time a race comes around. Also, when you have some sprint races, something which we'll get into a little bit later. So they have a lot of various markets. And also Bet365 is a good sports book because they're practically available worldwide. So either one of those two is a good bet.
Awesome. Good to know. So let's get into it. I think people that are somewhat familiar with F1 know that there's a main race, but what consists of an entire race weekend? Like, how's it start and how's it finish?
Okay, so race weekends generally start from Thursdays to Sundays. Thursdays, you got your usual press releases, you got your press conferences, and all that. And it's pretty interesting to watch, especially if you're really into F1 or you're getting into it. You can find out a little bit more about the team's strategy. The journalists will ask some questions to the drivers, which you can use for your own betting strategy, which we'll get into in a short while. Friday, you usually got 2 practice sessions. They usually last 60 minutes each. And this is very important for the teams and the drivers because they want to get used to the track. They want to get used to the setup, what the weather is like, how hot the track temperature is. There's a lot of details that go into the practice sessions. So they want to load up with different loads of fuel, see which tires work best, how much rubber they're using. Then you got Saturday, which you have your final practice session, and then the all-important qualifying. Then that leaves us with Sunday, which is the main event, the Grand Prix, the race.
Great. And are all races essentially the same? I mean, I know they're obviously on different tracks, but you mentioned before, you have some stuff like sprint races. Are all these kind of Grand Prix events, or how would you break that down?
Right. So last year, Formula One decided to introduce a new format to the races. So now you got sprint races on certain weekends. We had our first one in Imola a couple of weeks back. And essentially what it is that you have a practice session on the Friday, and then you have your qualifying session on the Friday as well, on the Friday afternoon. On Saturday, you have another practice session, but then you have a sprint race. So the qualifying session will determine the starting grid for the sprint race, but then the sprint race result will determine the starting grid for the Grand Prix on Sunday.
Okay, interesting. So in that, they're all racing on that Saturday, but the race is really just kind of a warm-up almost for like that main race on Sunday.
Well, the sprint race, again, is going to determine the grid for Sunday's race, but it's also not such a long race. So it's usually about a 100-kilometer dash, so which is like usually 18 to 20 laps, depending on the circuit, because they're obviously different lengths. But it just shakes things up a bit. It's a little bit of entertainment. And it's something optional where you can bet on. So there are other potential markets you can tap into, and possibly you can make some big bucks out of that.
Nice. That's good to know. Can you also bet on qualifying races as well?
Yeah, it really depends on the sports book that if they're offering those types of markets. But yes, generally qualifying is quite a big event. Like we had a few boring races in a row now. So we had Miami, we've got Barcelona coming up, and we got Monaco coming up. And generally, whoever qualifies on pole generally wins those races, especially Barcelona and Monaco. So qualifying is very important, and you can even bet on qualifying, and you can even, in some markets, you can even bet on who's going to get eliminated first. But there are more like prop bets, which we'll get into in a little while.
Yeah, so let's go into different types of betting. What are your favorite bets to make on Formula One? And what do you think are the most popular bets, maybe?
Okay, so obviously the most popular bets are outright betting. So when you're betting outright, it's like what driver is going to win this Grand Prix or which team is going to win this Grand Prix. Those are the most common bets or outright bets that you can find. You can also find future bets. Future bets is like who will win the World Championship this year, which driver, or who will win the Constructors Championship this year. You also got podium finish bets, so you can kind of like how horse racing betting is. So you can choose like who's going to come first, second, and third. You can choose like Max, Charles, Lewis, or whichever. You can choose them in the exact order that they finish, first, second, or third, or you can choose a mix. So like you want Lewis to be on the podium, you want Charles to be on the podium, Max to be on the podium, irrelevant of who finishes where, first, second, or third. As long as you mention the names, then that's a winning bet for you. But again, this very much depends on the markets available at the sportsbook of your choice. You also got some prop bets, which are very interesting. Like how I mentioned, you got prop bets on like who might get eliminated in Q1 or Q2 in qualifying, or which will there be a safety car period within this race? Who will retire first? That sort of thing. These are also bets that you can also make during live betting. Live betting can be very exciting in Formula One, and I've got a few tips for you to follow. You can listen to the commentators. Usually, F1 is broadcasted by Sky F1, and Sky F1 have some really, really dedicated sports commentators in the form of Martin Brundle, who was a racer himself, and David Croft. These guys are very smart in the way that they're commentating. They really know what they're saying. They really know what they're doing. So when you listen to what they're saying, you can make a really good bold decision on what bet you should place on live betting.
Can you kind of give us an example of that? Like, do you remember a time when, hey, they said, I don't know. I mean, what would they say that you should listen to and go, oh, maybe this is the time I should make this type of bet?
Well, they generally know exactly how the car is performing more than you and I, for example, right? So if they will say, oh, like the Mercedes looks like it's sandbagging. Sandbagging means they're holding back. You know, they're not really unleashing their full performance, their full pace. So you could say, so it's a tactic, right? So Mercedes or Red Bull, they might think they're way ahead, but then Mercedes will come on qualifying and they'll absolutely thrash everyone. It's just something that you just got to listen to. Also, a good tip is you should listen to the team radios. When you listen to the team radios, you're getting a bit more of an insight as to what's happening within that team. So if you want to place a prop bet on who's going to pit first, and you're hearing the team radio, and they'll be like, okay, Lewis, box now, box, box. That's your cue. Box means pit, and that's what you got to listen for.
Good to know. Let's get into some more strategies and tips then. Obviously, this isn't like a field sport like baseball or basketball, football, where generally all the courts are going to be the same, right? So different racetracks, I'm assuming you're going to have different strategies for each one of those. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So it's very favorable towards one team or the other. So you, like, for example, this season, we know that Red Bull is the fastest car on the straights, without a doubt. So unless the other teams develop their car further down the season, a race like Monza in Italy, for example, where it's just pretty much flat throughout, then I would probably bet on Red Bull to win that race just because of their outright speed. They're much faster. It's important that you watch a lot of practice sessions. So even though the race weekend starts on a Thursday, continues throughout the whole weekend, it would make sense for you to watch all 3 practice sessions, to watch qualifying, and to even watch the live interviews, because generally some questions will be thrown in there. You will get a hint as to what's happening. You will know who's where, and you will just start getting a general idea. So these are all important tips that you should listen to before making your bets on Formula One.
Cool. And I can probably give a tip. Maybe you can back me up here because I'm no expert, but I know, for instance, probably one of the most famous races has to be Monaco, right? But that's known for kind of windy, tight roads, not a lot of passing. right? So would that be the type of race where you look at qualifier, you look at who qualified first, you look at who has that pole position, who's sitting in front, and that's probably who you're going to bet on or who you want to bet on to win it all? Would you say that's a good strategy there?
Yeah, no doubt. Now, as much as we hate to admit it, sometimes Formula One can be a little bit predictable. Not always, but most of the time, yes. So generally, you would want to be really tempted into placing a bet with the underdog, right? When they have great odds and they might win it. And in some cases, it can happen. But generally, more often than not, it's the people who are on pole who are going to win the race. However, you shouldn't give pole such importance because so many things can happen. Monaco is a good example. Hardly any overtaking takes place within Monaco. As I mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a boring race, right? So it's all about the qualifying. Monaco has some slow speed corners, not really high speed. So you're looking for a high downforce setup. Ferrari looks good, in my opinion, this year, but as does the Red Bull. So it's really a two-horse race this year, but then you got somewhere like Barcelona, where it's pretty much the same. You got a mixture of high-speed corners and low-speed corners. However, you got a 500-meter long straight, and anyone can lunge down the straight on the first lap. So the overtake can be done there, and that's where most of the overtakes generally happen.
Okay. So we mentioned that there are some of those like kind of more boring races like Monaco or whatever. So in those races, yeah, it might be tempting just to pick the safe bet of pole position. Are there maybe some other bets or prop bets that you would look at that, I don't know, might be more interesting or more fun, like a fastest lap or, I don't know, a qualifier or something like that?
So apart from betting on qualifying and obviously on pole, I would probably choose who's going to pit first or which car to retire. Monaco is a very tight and twisty street circuit. There's always going to be someone crashing out. There's always going to be a safety car, no doubt about it. So that's something that I would do. Live betting, for sure.
Interesting. Okay. So if you're somebody like me or maybe somebody else who's new to the Formula One game, where would you say is a good place to go to kind of educate yourself and get a little more into it and a little more information?
So yeah, there's always a ton of websites that you can use, which you can make some research about. You can also learn what's going on in the background, what kind of car developments, what other developments the constructors are doing to get better results, faster times. And there's no better place than the actual Formula One website, F1.com. You can get all the latest news, everything from there. You can also get some inside scoop from Sky Sports F1. They generally are snooping around the pit lane. They know what's coming up. They know what upgrades are going to be stuck on which car to which driver, etc. So that's another good place. There's also other websites such as WTF1. They also generally have a lot of updates, like latest updates as to what's going to be happening with the cars, circuits, etc. So always do your research. Always visit these websites and always have a look, just so you can have an idea. Remember, Formula One teams and drivers, they strategize their one race at a time. As someone who's betting on Formula One, you should do the same. Strategize one race at a time.
Great. And I know I'll give you a little plug here too. Marcus writes some articles for us on each Formula One race that you can find at thegruelingtruth.com. We have a link in the bio that you can find down below or in that video description. Marcus does some great work for us where he's giving you guys, hey, this is probably who you should bet on. This is who's looking good for these races. These are some good prop bets to make. So if you're interested to hear more from Marcus, you can always hear more from him on the Grueling Truth. So lastly, let's talk about it again, Marcus, right? What are some of your favorite sites? Why are they your favorites, right? And my guess is it's probably because of the good bonuses they have.
Okay, yeah. So if you're in the US, definitely worth checking out Caesars. They've got some great markets available. They will also probably have some prop bets available whilst the race is actually happening. Generally, most betting websites, they start off with the quick bets, like the futures betting for the Drivers' Championship or the outright bets on who will win this race. But generally, as the race gets closer or on qualifying day, on the Saturday, more markets will be added. So Caesars is a good shout out. They've got an $1,100 first bet insurance that you can use and you can make use of. You've also got FanDuel. FanDuel is actually operated by Betfair in the US. So they can usually have very good markets outside of the US. So FanDuel will most likely have those same markets within the US. They've also got up to $1,000 first bet insurance. I believe I said 100 earlier, so I'm going to correct myself there. It's actually 1,000. If you're looking outside of the US, international, always make sure to check out what bonuses there are available. So that's the best thing you should do. However, I generally like Betfair because apart from them having an exchange, they also have a really good sportsbook with some really good markets and good odds. And you should also check out Bet365 because they're pretty much available worldwide, as I mentioned earlier. And they generally have decent markets and some decent odds as well.
Cool, that's good to know. And so if you're interested in getting those odds, getting links to those websites, and getting links to those bonuses, you can find them all through thegruelingtruth.com. You can find some of them in the video description below. So thank you, everybody who's out there watching this, and thanks, Marcus, for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jesse.
Anytime.